This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for May 22nd through the 28th. This week in this overstocked edition of the podcast, we discuss the festival that only money can buy, we hold hands for charity, and we celebrate the birth of Danny Zimmerman's older brother, Mr. Elston Gunnn. This show goes more in depth about some of the events that we put on our daily podcast, the Music History Today podcast, which drops every single day, including weekends, wherever you get your podcast from. Now, on to this week's episode. Let's start off the podcast by going to a rock festival, shall we? Back in 1982, Apple billionaire Steve Wozniak thought that his generation was a little too into themselves. Honestly, I think every generation is too into themselves, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, the Woz, as most people call them these days, decided that what the 80s needed was love, sweet love. And what better way to do that than with a rock festival? Unlike the now infamous Fire Festival, Woz got help from someone who knew how to do these things from the ground up, legendary promoter Bill Graham. Off they went to Glen Helen Regional Park in the San Bernardino area of California. They built a brand new venue, which Woz paid for, bulldozing and everything, along with a new stage. The festival was spread out over 2 weekends over 2 years. The first show was held on Labor Day weekend in 1982. How's this for a lineup of a show? The Grateful Dead, the Police, the Cars, Jimmy Buffett, Jackson Browne, the Kinks, Tom Petty, Pat Benatar, and Santana, just to name a few of the acts who were on stage that weekend. The second festival was held in late May of 1983. This time it was a 4-day show, with Barry Fay promoting it instead of Bill Graham. This weekend was more historical from a musical standpoint. It featured the coming out party in America for both INXS and U2. It was also at this concert that Mick Jones played with The Clash. He would leave the group soon thereafter. Van Halen played, as did Willie Nelson, Motley Crue, The English Beat, The Divinyls, Stevie Nicks, and the Stray Cats. Lots of people showed up for both events, but with Wozniak footing the bill, he's still lost money. Around $24 million between both weekends. Also, there were over 100 arrests, at least 35 drug overdoses, and an apparent murder of a hitchhiker who was going to the show. Well, at least the Fire Festival didn't kill anyone. Not that we know of, anyway. Still, being a billionaire does have its perks, and the Woz was no different when he put on the second of his 2 US music festivals, which started on May 28th, 1983. Next, we hold hands for 15 minutes for charity. I'll explain. Back in the mid-1980s, there were a lot of charity songs and events to raise money for famine relief. It all started when Sir Bob Geldof put together an all-star singing group for the song Do They Know It's Christmas. Actually, you can even go further back, all the way back to George Harrison doing the concert for Bangladesh in the 1970s. But this was the 80s, so that's the starting point for this version. Anyway, the whole Do They Know It's Christmas Band-Aid thing then led to an American version of that from a group called USA for Africa. That was the famous We Are the World song, along with a British and American same-day concert forever known as Live Aid. John Mellencamp, Neil Young, and Willie Nelson then got together to help out the American family farmers and started the Farm Aid concerts, which still go on to this day. The USA for Africa Foundation that sprung out of the We Are the World project then decided to do another project. While all of the other projects were for African famine, there wasn't really anything at that point to help out American hunger except for Farm Aid, and that was actually for the small farmers, as it were. USA for America decided to change that with something called Hands Across America. During the event, people would donate $10 to reserve their place in line and hold hands in a human chain that was supposed to go across America. They would also sing this very catchy theme song that had been performed by members of the rock group Toto. They got a bunch of celebrities to help out by positioning them in various cities, and the idea kind of went off to the races at that point. Now, you may be asking yourself, what's the catch? Did something bad happen? Didn't everybody like that idea? I mean, it's for charity, mind you. Actually, no. There were real protests to it, if you can believe this. Not because of the idea itself, but because of the way the human chain map was set up. Yes, folks, people were actually fighting over the map. The idea of the map was to have a continuous chain that stretched across the continental United States. However, that meant not including some states, and some people got, they got really offended by it. For instance, the late Senator Ted Kennedy and the now Senator, then Congressman Ed Markey, both representing the fine state of Massachusetts, my home state, were offended that the chain missed at least 4 New England states, so of course they held a protest. Also in Hawaii, actor Tom Selleck, who at the time was filming the TV show Magnum P.I. in the state, protested with islanders because of the fact that Hawaii was left out because it's not on the continental United States. Now, I'm not sure that anybody would have really wanted to have held hands in the Pacific Ocean to connect them to the continental United States, but whatever. I also can't recall if anybody bothered to protest in Alaska, which you would have had to have gone through Canada, but that's a whole other beast. Regardless, the event, as hokey and as protested as it was actually kind of successful. It raised $15 million after expenditures for local hunger and homelessness charities. Plus, even though parts of the chain were incomplete in certain areas, for instance, the desert states, also some of the mountain states, the Rocky Mountains, kind of big, kind of cold, they figured out that if you put the number of people who participated in the event next to each other, then that would have stretched completely across the country. The Hands Across America charity event happened on May 25th, 1986. Next, Tom Petty was one of those guys I think people always took for granted. He wasn't revered like, say, Bono or Paul McCartney when he was alive. Even in death, people automatically went to his hits Free Falling and I Won't Back Down, thinking that that's all the guy ever did. Well, they're wrong. Tom Petty, both with and without the Heartbreakers, did so much more. In fact, every musician owes whatever money they make to him for one reason. He fought for his rights. And in the process, he fought for theirs. I could go on and on about all the hits that he had, like Last Dance with Mary Jane, Don't Come Around Here No More, You Got Lucky, American Girl, Breakdown, and many others, but I will stick with just one event, his bankruptcy. Here's what happened. When Tom signed his first record deal, what he didn't realize, like a lot of people, was that he had signed away all of his songwriting rights for $10,000. That meant that for any and all past and future royalties, whatever he made, his record company and people who basically screwed him out of all of his money would make 10 times as much. Tom first sued to get out of his contract. Then the record company sued him, claiming breach of contract. What he and his manager did next was sheer genius. On May 23, 1979, Tom Petty declared bankruptcy. Now, normally you would think that that is a bad thing. What this did, though, was that at that time, All contracts and debts had to be renegotiated, which protected Petty from both the record company's lawsuit and would mean a much smaller piece of the pie for all those record companies. The record companies didn't want any other artist trying this little trick, so they struck a deal with Petty out of court. Petty got his own record label imprint, but more importantly, he got his songwriting and his publishing rights back. In short, Tom Petty beat the record labels at their own game, and that is why he's important to rock and roll, and that's what makes the lyrics of his huge hit, I Won't Back Down, even more important to this very day. Tom Petty filing for bankruptcy and in the process sticking up for recording artists everywhere on May 23rd, 1979. Before we go any further, we'd like to tell you about our other podcasts. The Music History Today podcast goes over the daily events in music history and drops daily, including weekends, on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. There's also the Music Halls of Fame podcast, which talks about a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, along with other Music Halls of Fame's museums and walks of fame. The Music Halls of Fame podcast drops every Thursday and can also be found on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to this podcast. In this segment, we go over a horrific terrorist attack and some major passings. I promise we'll finish with the happy news in the final segment. First up, to an act of terrorism that shattered the joy of a pop concert in Manchester, England. On May 22, 2017, as people were leaving the Ariana Grande concert at the Manchester Arena, a suicide bomber detonated an improvised explosive device, an IED, in the foyer of the arena. The blast killed 21 people and injured over 1,000 others. Many of the victims were young concertgoers, leaving a profound impact on the city and the nation. The attack was claimed by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, otherwise known as ISIL, although there's no evidence of their direct involvement. Salman Abedi, a British citizen of Libyan descent, was killed in the attack and was identified as the attacker. Investigations revealed that he was not considered a high-threat individual by authorities prior to the attack, which raised questions from intelligence people about their own failures as to where and how the explosives were obtained. The aftermath of the bombing saw an outpouring of grief and solidarity. Manchester united in mourning the victims and supporting the injured. Ariana Grande herself returned to the city months later for a benefit concert, raising millions for the victims' families. The Manchester area bombings remains the deadliest terrorist attack in the United Kingdom since the July 7th London bombings of 2005. It exposed vulnerabilities in security measures and highlighted the chilling impact of terrorism on innocent civilians. The attack also sparked discussions about radicalization and the need for vigilance in the face of extremist threats. The terrorist attack that claimed the lives of 21 people at an Ariana Grande concert, May 22nd, 2017. Now, on to the passings. We'll start with someone who passed away just as he was beginning to break through. Bradley Nowell was the lead singer and guitarist of the group Sublime. Through Sublime, Bradley was a key figure in the rise of ska punk, a genre that blended the sunny melodies of ska with the raw energy of punk rock. Born on February 22, 1968, and raised in Long Beach, California, Nowell was drawn to music at a pretty young age. He experimented with various instruments before gravitating towards the guitar, fueled by California's burgeoning punk scene. While attending California State University, Long Beach, Nowell met bassist Eric Wilson and drummer Bud Gow. Together, they formed the group Sublime in 1988. Noel's musical influences were diverse, encompassing both ska, reggae, punk, and even surf rock. This eclectic mix became Sublime's signature sound, a sound that resonated with California's laid-back beach culture. Sublime's early years were marked by energetic live shows and a growing local following. Their music captured the youthful spirit of rebellion, blending catchy melodies with introspective lyrics that touched on themes about social alienation, relationships, and personal struggles. Noel's charismatic stage presence and smooth, raspy vocals became a defining feature for the band. Sublime's breakthrough came in 1994 with the release of their album 40 Ounces to Freedom. The album, featuring the hit singles What I Got and Santeria, perfectly captured the band's unique sound and carefree Californian spirit. It resonated with a generation of young people who were yearning for an escape from the mainstream at that point. Tragically, Noel's personal struggles with heroin addiction would cut his life short. Just days before embarking on a national tour in 1996, Bradley Nowell was found dead in a San Francisco hotel room on May 25, 1996, from a heroin overdose. He was only 28 years old. Despite his short career, Bradley Nowell's impact on music is undeniable. Sublime's music continues to be enjoyed by millions to this day, and their influence can be heard in countless bands that followed them. Nowell's legacy extends beyond music. He is actually remembered as a talented musician, charismatic frontman, and a symbol of California's carefree spirit. Forever frozen in time at the peak of his creativity. What could have been? Although the new generation of Sublime has refound them, as Bradley Nowell's son has now taken over the reins as the frontman for the new version of Sublime, which just played at Coachella. Lead singer Bradley Nowell of the California ska band Sublime passed away from a heroin overdose on May 25th, 1996. Edward Kennedy Duke Ellington was born on April 29, 1899 in Washington, D.C. He wasn't destined for music at first. Although his mother played piano, his early passion leaned towards the visual arts. However, by his teen years, the allure of music, particularly ragtime, shifted his focus. He began playing piano professionally at 17, composing his own pieces alongside honing his own performance skills. Ellington's career took a pivotal turn in 1923 when he moved to New York City. There, he formed his own band, the Washingtonians, which eventually evolved into the iconic Duke Ellington Orchestra. The band's sound, characterized by Ellington's masterful arrangements and the unique talents of his musicians, was unlike anything that was heard before. Bubber Miley's wah-wah trumpet and Joe Nanton's growl trombone became signatures of the Ellington sound, a sonic tapestry that was rich in texture and innovation. The late 1920s saw Ellington's rise to national prominence. A residency at Harlem's famed Cotton Club, coupled with radio broadcasts and recordings, brought the orchestra into millions of homes. Ellington's compositions, like the ever-popular Mood Indigo, captured the energy and romance of the era. Ellington wasn't one to be confined by genres, by the way. He constantly pushed all the boundaries, incorporating elements of swing, blues, and even classical music into his compositions. He wasn't just a band leader, he was a prolific composer, writing thousands of pieces for his orchestra, films, and even stage productions. His ability to craft miniatures perfectly suited for the 78 RPM record format at that time made him a master of capturing a mood or story within a few short minutes. Ellington's career spanned over 5 decades. He toured extensively, captivating audiences worldwide. He faced the challenges of segregation in America, of course, yet his music transcended racial barriers. Throughout his life, Ellington received numerous accolades, including a Presidential Medal of Freedom and a nomination for a Pulitzer Prize. When Duke Ellington passed away on May 24, 1974, he left behind a legacy that continues to inspire musicians and music lovers alike. His compositions remain jazz standards, and his influence can be felt across a vast spectrum of American music. Duke Ellington was an American icon who reshaped the landscape of music forever. Jazz icon Duke Ellington passed away on May 24th, 1974, at the age of 75. Gustav Holst, born on September 21st, 1874 in England, was surrounded by music as a child. His father was a pianist and his mother was a singer. Despite all of that, his initial passion leaned towards art, much like Duke Ellington's did. But by his teenage years, the pull of music, particularly the bombast of composers like Wagner, proved irresistible. He started composing alongside learning piano, trombone, and organ, laying the groundwork for his future achievements. Holst's musical journey continued at the Royal College of Music in London, England, and there he honed his compositional skills and befriended fellow composer Ralph Vaughan Williams, a friendship that would influence both of their careers. However, financial realities forced Holst to take up teaching, a profession that would occupy him for decades. Despite the demands on him because of teaching, Holst still managed to compose prolifically across genres, everything from operas and choral works to chamber pieces and orchestral suites. A defining characteristic of his music was his masterful orchestration. He possessed a unique ability to draw out the individual voices of each instrument, creating a rich tapestry of sound. Now, while Holst produced a vast amount of music, his most enduring work remains The Planets, an orchestral suite that was completed in 1916. Inspired by astrology and the Roman deities associated with the planets, each movement is a vivid portrayal of a celestial body. From the power of probably the most famous part of this whole piece, called Mars, the Bringer of War, to the ethereal beauty of Venus, the Bringer of Peace, the suite showcased Holst's compositional genius and his ability to evoke emotion through sound. Holst wasn't afraid to explore diverse influences. His fascination with Hindu myths found expression in his choral works, while the English folk music revival of his era left its mark in his compositions. This openness to new ideas, coupled with his own unique voice, resulted in a distinctive musical style for him. Although The Planets overshadowed many of his other works, Holst's legacy extends far beyond that one piece of music. He was also a skilled teacher who nurtured young musicians, a respected conductor who brought his own pieces to life, and a prolific composer who left behind a rich musical tapestry. When Gustav Holst passed away on May 25, 1934, he left the world a treasure trove of music that continues to resonate with audiences to this day. Composer Gustav Holst passed away on May 25, 1934, at the age of 59. Gil Scott-Heron, born on May 1, 1949 in Chicago, Illinois, was a powerful voice for social justice and a chronicler of the African American experience in the latter half of the 20th century. Raised by his grandmother after his parents' early divorce, Gil Scott-Heron was exposed to music and activism from a very young age. This upbringing would fuel his artistic fire and social conscience. By his college years, Scott-Heron had already begun writing poetry that tackled social issues like racism, poverty, and political disenfranchisement. His unique style, blending spoken word with jazz and blues influences, resonated with a generation that was yearning for change, and change quickly. In 1970, with the release of his album Small Talk at 125th and Lenox, Scott Heron's career skyrocketed. The album featured the iconic poem, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," a scathing critique of media portrayals of social movements. Delivered with his signature rhythmic cadence over a driving beat, the poem became an anthem for both the civil rights and the Black Power movements. Gil Scott-Heron's music wasn't limited just to protest songs, though. He explored themes of love, loss, and everyday struggles faced by Black communities. Albums like Pieces of a Man and Winter in America solidified his reputation as a powerful voice for social change. Beyond music, Gil Scott-Heron was a prolific writer, publishing novels and plays that further explored the social and political landscape of his time. Gil wasn't afraid to challenge authority and expose hypocrisy, making him a thorn in the side of the establishment. Gil Scott-Heron's influence transcended genre. His spoken word delivery and socially conscious lyrics are considered foundational elements of hip-hop music. Artists like Jay-Z and Kendrick Lamar have acknowledged him as a major source of inspiration for them. Despite facing personal struggles later in life, Gil Scott-Heron's legacy remains untarnished. When he passed away in 2011, he left behind a rich artistic legacy that continues to inspire generations of musicians, activists, and poets. Gil Scott-Heron was a voice of a generation, a truth teller who used his art to challenge the status quo and to fight for a better world. The revolution will not be televised. Songwriter and poet Gil Scott-Heron passed away from AIDS-related illness on May 27, 2011, at the age of 62. Gregg Allman, born on December 8, 1947 in Nashville, Tennessee, was a cornerstone of Southern rock and a founding member of the legendary Allman Brothers Band. Raised on a healthy dose of rhythm and blues, Allman's musical path was clear from a young age. Alongside his brother Duane, he co-founded the Allman Brothers Band in 1969, a group that would redefine the rock landscape. The Allman Brothers Band was not your typical rock band. They blended blues, rock, jazz, and even country influences into a sound that was both powerful and soulful. Gregg Allman's songwriting prowess was on display in iconic tracks like Whipping Post, Melissa, and The Midnight Rider. His soulful vocals and bluesy organ playing became synonymous with the band's sound. Tragedy struck the band early on with the death of Duane Allman in a motorcycle accident in 1971. Despite this devastating loss, Gregg Allman, along with the remaining members, persevered. They continued to tour and record, achieving immense success with albums like Eat a Peach and Brothers and Sisters. These albums showcased the band's musical maturity and cemented their place in rock history. Allman's personal life was as turbulent as his times. He battled substance abuse throughout his entire career, a struggle he chronicled in his autobiography, My Cross to Bear. He also had 7 marriages, including a 3-year marriage to Cher from 1975 to 1978, along with personal losses. Despite all the challenges, Gregg Allman continued to make music. He embarked on a successful solo career, releasing critically acclaimed albums like Laid Back and Searching for Simplicity, and had a solo hit with the aptly titled song I'm No Angel. His soulful voice and introspective lyrics resonated with fans across generations, even with his solo career. Gregg's legacy extends far beyond his music. He was a pioneer of Southern rock, a genre that continues to influence countless musicians. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the Allman Brothers Band and received numerous accolades for his contributions to music. When Gregg Allman passed away in 2017, he left behind a musical legacy that continues to this day. His soulful voice, along with his lyrics, continue to be etched in the annals of rock history. He was a Southern storyteller, a survivor, and a true musical icon. Greg Allman of the Allman Brothers Band passed away on May 27, 2017 at the age of 69. Anna Mae Bullock was born on November 26, 1939 in Brownsville, Tennessee. In 1956, she was just a nursing assistant going to the clubs at night in St. Louis. One night, she watched a local band called the Kings of Rhythm at a bar that Anna's sister worked at. Anna loved what she heard, so much so that she started dating the saxophonist, which worked out okay because her sister was dating the band's drummer. The band was led by Ike Turner, who was an accomplished musician, band leader, and a label talent scout for some of the Midwest R&B record labels. One night during an intermission, someone in the band decided to let Anna sing along. Her voice impressed the band so much that she sang some songs with the band during the next show and became their backup singer. In 1960, the band had studio time booked and were supposed to record with Art Lassiter. Lassiter didn't show up for the gig, so they let Anna record the song. After all, they had the studio booked and the studio time was expensive even back then. Anna's song was so good that the band was convinced to send it to a local radio station. The band was also convinced to change direction. Ike Turner decided to change the name of the backup singers to the Ikettes. He also promoted Anna to lead singer and gave her a stage name, Tina Turner. Ike ended up marrying Tina in 1962, but they also had an extremely tumultuous relationship, which is putting it very nicely. See the movie What's Love Got to Do with It, starring Angela Bassett and Lawrence Fishburne, if you really want to know the details. The duo ended up divorcing in 1977. Both of their solo careers would languish for a time, and at that point, with Tina also being a single mother trying to feed her kids with very little money coming in, things were extremely tough for her. It was so tough that she had to take a gig at the Sun City Resort in South Africa, which put her in violation of sanctions that were in place against the South African racist apartheid regime. Tina would finally get a solo hit single in 1983 when her remake of the Reverend Al Green song Let's Stay Together was the first single released from the Private Dancer album. Then she came storming back with the song What's Love Got to Do with It, which became an instant classic in 1984. During her solo career resurgence from 1984 to 1999, Tina released 5 albums, including Private Dancer, and had hits like We Don't Need Another Hero, Private Dancer, The Best, Typical Male, I Don't Want to Fight, Golden Eye, It's Only Love, and Better Be Good to Me. In May of 2009, Tina stepped away from touring, although she continued doing the occasional appearance here and there. The nicknamed Queen of Rock and Roll was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 2021 for her solo career, but sent a video message and did not attend the ceremony. Unbeknownst to most people, Tina was suffering from various health issues at that time. Tina Turner passed away on May 24th, 2023 at the age of 83 in Zurich, Switzerland. The Queen of Rock and Roll, Tina Turner, passed away on May 24th, 2023 at the age of 83. After that downer of a segment, let's get back to the happy stuff, shall we? Let's start by celebrating the life of Danny Zimmerman's older brother. That would be Mr. Elston Gunnn. Elston grew up in Minnesota. From an early age, he was, like most kids, interested in music, so he picked up a guitar. His initial inspiration was Chuck Berry. At a high school gig, Elston was so loud that the principal cut off his microphone. Elston went to college but continued to play, and when he decided to relocate, he went east to New York City. And it was there where he found his calling and made his mark, first acoustically and then electrically. He met his biggest idol, Woody Guthrie, played a bunch of clubs, and fell in with a bunch of musicians who would all later become famous. Elston's songs later became poetic legends about social injustice and the Vietnam War. Once he got his recording contract, there was no stopping him. He became a symbol of the American counterculture movement and dragged folk music into the mainstream. He is now an icon, with multiple Grammy Awards, a Pulitzer Prize, and even a Nobel Prize for Literature for his songwriting. In fact, he is known as one of the greatest songwriters of all time. Danny Zimmerman's older brother also changed his stage name from Mr. Elston Gunnn, with 3 N's, mind you, to who you know him as now, the pride of Duluth, Minnesota, Bob Dylan. However, before Bob was an icon, he made this album. Bob's self-titled debut album did not go well. In fact, it only sold 5,000 copies initially. On that album, he only had 2 original songs, and he did cover songs for the rest of it. For his second album, he wanted to write most of the songs. He had gotten quite political during this time due to his girlfriend, who he had moved in with. He wrote a lot about war and civil rights for his album. His words were both poetic and very biting, which put a lot of power to folk music at that point. He recorded this album in 1 year, between April 1962 to April 1963. It was begun in New York City and then London for a time before finishing up in New York again. It was towards the end of the New York recording sessions that his infamous incident on the Ed Sullivan TV show happened, when he walked off the stage because the show wouldn't let him perform one of his songs. This album, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, was released on May 27, 1963, and was a hit. It went to number 22 on the Billboard charts, and even better overseas. It definitely did much better than his self-titled album, which only sold 5,000 copies. The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan had the now classic songs Masters of War, Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, and Blowin' in the Wind. Bob was also famous for another event. On July 26, 1965, this event was so destructive to the sanctity of life itself that it still gets talked about to this day. Women still cry. Men with long hair still smoke a blunt before telling the dark, twisted tale of how Bob Dylan went electric at the Newport Folk Festival. Seriously, people, this was a huge deal back then. Well, at least to the folk crowd anyway. See, back in the early to mid-1960s, Bob was huge. I'm not sure how to describe it in today's terms because there was really no one like him these days. That's probably why he's still so revered. Anyway, in the 60s, folk music became all the rage. The group The Byrds kind of kicked it into the mainstream when their cover of Dylan's song Mr. Tambourine Man broke through, but by then, Dylan was already the king of folk music. That was helped in no small part to his performance at the Newport Folk Festival in 1964. He was introduced then by Ronnie Gilbert of the Weavers, who said, quote, "And here he is. Take him. You know him. He's yours." End quote. Folk people apparently took that to heart. To them, Dylan was the Pied Piper. By the 1965 Folk Festival, the crowd that proclaimed him as theirs was ready for their Lord and Savior to return. What his crowd didn't realize was that by that time, Dylan was going in a different direction. Only months earlier, he decided not to go with an acoustic sound, and instead, he embraced the electric guitar. He recorded the now classic song Like a Rolling Stone only months earlier and released it only 5 days before his appearance at the festival, so the crowd wasn't really ready for his new sound. So, how would they react? Well, not well. In fact, hate doesn't even begin to describe their reaction. Bob went on stage, plugged in his guitar, and went into an electric version of his acoustic hit Maggie's Farm. The crowd went wild. And by wild, I mean they booed. They screamed and said some really not nice things to him. One guy even famously called him Judas, to which Bob retorted, quote, "I don't believe you. You're a liar." End quote. Bob had a sick sense of humor. Dylan was shocked by the reaction, but his decision was final. He continued playing and recording with the electric guitar and continued with his vision. It's not clear if his crowd ever forgave him for changing his style, but it really didn't matter. So yeah, kids, Dylan going electric really was a big deal back then, and he did it at the Newport Folk Festival on July 25th, 1965. After that, Bob released the classic albums Highway 61 Revisited and Blonde on Blonde, but then he got into a very serious motorcycle accident in 1966, which put him into such a funk, both physically and mentally, that he went into seclusion to recover. He went back to touring in 1974. He became a Christian and put out more award-winning albums and is still at it, of course, to this very day. The pride of Duluth, Minnesota, Robert Allen Zimmerman, Elston Gunnn, Bob Dylan, born May 24th, 1941, and whose breakthrough album, one of the greatest albums of all time according to Rolling Stone magazine, among many other best of lists, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, was released on May 27th, 1963. The final story is about quite possibly the most recognizable orchestral motion picture soundtrack of all time. Note that I did not say best-selling soundtrack of all time. That honor still goes to The Bodyguard, Saturday Night Fever, and a couple of others. However, once you hear this movie's opening theme, along with a few other pieces of music that have become lexicons of pop culture, then you know that you've been taken to a galaxy far, far away. On May 25th, 1977, the movie Star Wars opened. Note that I said Star Wars, not Star Wars Episode 4, not Star Wars A New Hope, not Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, just plain old zippity-doo-dah Star Wars. The way it was originally titled, kids. Anyway, we could go on and on about the troubles that George Lucas had in making the movie, how 20th Century Fox looked at it as a low-budget throwaway tax write-off of a movie, how it only opened in 40 movie theaters nationwide on May 25th, 1977, because 20th Century Fox had no hope in this movie at all, how George almost originally lost the movie, if not for the backing of studio executive Robert Evans in completing it, or how, whether it was done purposely or just plain old dumb luck, that George managed to let the studio take some control of the movie in exchange for George keeping the copyrights and also the merchandising rights. That last part, by the way, was brilliant. One of the greatest business moves of all time that still gets taught in business schools. Own your copyrights and your merchandising rights, people. However, this isn't actually a movie podcast, it's a music one. So, we're going to talk about the soundtrack. The soundtrack itself wasn't released until June 1977, a few weeks after the movie came out. But this is a podcast about the week of May 22nd through the 28th. The reason why we're talking about it now is because no one apparently remembers when exactly in June the soundtrack came out. So, since the world first heard it on May 25th, that fits this week, so we're going to talk about it now and not in June. Composer John Williams was born in Flushing, Queens, New York on February 8, 1932. By the time he wrote the score for Star Wars, he had already been writing music for film and television for 20 years. He even had a couple of Academy Awards to show for his efforts, one for Fiddler on the Roof in 1971 and one for Jaws in 1975. Steven Spielberg, who directed Jaws and was George Lucas's good friend, suggested Williams for Star Wars. Even though Star Wars was a science fiction movie, both George and John decided that the non-futuristic orchestral soundtrack would work best for this one. John borrowed heavily from the styles of the aforementioned Gustav Holst, along with Igor Stravinsky, Richard Strauss, among many others. Along with being the composer, John was also the music director and orchestra conductor, and also the orchestrator, along with Herbert W. Spencer, Angela Morley, Al Woodbury, and Arthur Morton. Lionel Newman and Jules Chaikin were the music supervisors on this project. John recorded the 800-page film score with 86 members of the London Symphony Orchestra at Anvil Studios in Denham, England. There were 16 recording sessions spread out between March 5th through the 16th of 1977. The first section of the score that was recorded was the Chasm Crossfire on March 5th, and the last piece was the end title on March 16th. There were 219 takes done over the entire sessions. For the record, the main theme that opens all of the Star Wars movies was the fourth piece that was recorded on the very first day. The Cantina Band music was recorded on March 10th, and Darth Vader's theme, the Imperial March, was not recorded because, contrary to some people's beliefs, that theme was not in the original movie. Darth Vader's theme premiered in the sequel, The Empire Strikes Back. Also, the main theme is one of the few songs that you immediately know after only the first note has been played. I can name that tune in one note, and you actually can. The original 1977 soundtrack release almost didn't even happen. Much like the movie that spawned it, 20th Century Fox didn't believe in the music either, thinking that orchestral soundtracks were a thing of a bygone era. That all changed when their little throwaway project and tax write-off exploded in the first weekend and became a massive hit in only 40 theaters because they didn't even believe in the movie, so they didn't even give it a wide release. The lines for the movie's opening were so long that the studio had to go and rush copies of the movie to more theaters nationwide, with a lot of theaters having to stay open 24 hours a day for almost a year in order to accommodate all the people who wanted to see it. In my local movie theater at Showcase Cinemas in West Springfield, Massachusetts, the movie ran on multiple screens for over a year and a half before it finally went to second-run theaters, which would be today's equivalent of, I guess, streaming or cable. The movie eventually beat out Spielberg's movie Jaws for the biggest movie of all time, until Steven Spielberg took that record back with his movie E.T. Once people started asking about the movie's music, 20th Century Fox then decided to release the soundtrack again at some point in June 1977. No one remembers exactly what day. Why? I couldn't even tell you. When the soundtrack came out, it was a double album and was made for auto-changing record players, which were those record players where you could stack the LPs one on top of another, and when one side of the first record was finished playing, the record needle would shift to the far right, the next record would drop down, the needle would then reset itself on the new record, and the record would just start playing automatically without you having to get up and change it. Pretty ingenious, actually. Therefore, the first LP of the soundtrack had sides 1 and 4, and the second LP had sides 2 and 3. There was 88 minutes of film music, but only 75 minutes of it made the original 2-disc release. The movie's running time, by the way, was 121 minutes, which just goes to show you how much music was in that movie. Of course, since then, there have been a bunch of re-releases, special editions, box sets, etc. to incorporate all of the music plus outtakes. The soundtrack itself won many awards, including the Academy Award and the Golden Globe Awards for Best Film Score. It also won 3 Grammy Awards and was even nominated for Album of the Year, which is an extreme rarity for an orchestral film score. It inspired a disco song by Domenico Monardo, better known these days as Miko. The disco theme, which combined the movie's main theme with the Cantina Band's music, went top 10 on the singles chart, and of course the theme song for Star Wars was part of a huge sketch by Bill Murray for Saturday Night Live that became pretty famous at the time. Such was the power of Star Wars. The success of the original movie revolutionized movies and pop culture itself. First came the sequels and other sci-fi lookalikes because, everybody's always got to capitalize on a good thing. It helped to get other companies to revisit older sci-fi franchises like Buck Rogers, which was a Saturday morning movie serial that was made into a TV series starring Gil Gerard and Aaron Gray. There was Flash Gordon, another Saturday morning movie serial that was made into a movie that's still probably more famous for its soundtrack that was done by the group Queen. And then, of course, there's Star Trek, a mildly popular TV show in the 1960s that found a second life in the 1970s in TV syndication and became the movie and TV franchise that it is today. George Lucas's special effects shop, ILM, or Industrial Light and Magic, went on to do groundbreaking work that it's still doing to this very day. Star Wars practically invented doing origin stories after the original stories had already been told by releasing the prequels, of course. And then there's the way merchandising revolutionized everything. And then, of course, there's Disney buying the franchise and running it into the ground. But that's just my personal opinion. Quality rather than quantity, Disney. Just saying, I don't need to have it shoved down my throat every single minute of every single day. Let it breathe a little while, would you? Anyway, as far as John Williams went, he became the conductor of the Boston Pops Orchestra for 14 years. He also worked with Lucas and Spielberg on more projects and has won tons of awards for movies such as the Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark franchise, Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, etc., etc. The Star Wars soundtrack revolutionized the orchestral soundtracks. Plus, the original Star Wars soundtrack was voted the greatest American movie soundtrack of all time and was inducted into the Library of Congress National Recording Registry in 2004. The movie and its soundtrack has also gone on to inspire countless musicians, scientists, astronauts, computer engineers, writers, actors, directors, and many other professionals. In short, the movie Star Wars and the soundtrack to the movie changed lives forever. Happy real Star Wars Day, people. The first time that the general public heard John Williams' iconic film score to the movie Star Wars. Not Star Wars Episode 4, not Star Wars, never mind. When the movie Star Wars opened in 40 movie theaters on May 25th, 1977. And that is it for the Music History In-Depth podcast for May 22nd through the 28th. Thanks for listening.